I've been using the 24-inch iMac for about a year now, and at the moment there's loads of rumours about a bigger version arriving soon. So that begs the question, is the 24-inch iMac still worth buying? Hello and welcome back to Ellis Reviews, and thank you for subscribing if you have, and if you haven't subscribed, the button is just down there. Once you've owned an iMac, you never really want to try any other desktop computer ever again. I think that as a complete all-in-one package, the iMac is pretty unbeatable. And that's why the 24-inch iMac couldn't fail. It's got a much thinner design than the outgoing Intel version, it's still got that wonderful screen, and now it has the M1 chip, which it's just set the world alight. I've been using mine for a year now. It's been running this business. Primarily it was in my old studio, which you might have seen in previous videos. Now it's in the kitchen temporarily because that seems to be what they do in Apple land. People use iMacs in kitchens. But what you care about is whether or not it's worth buying the 24-inch iMac today. The first thing I've learned about the 24-inch iMac is that screen and how I've very quickly become accustomed to it. I never entertained the 21.5, I think it was, inch iMac that this has replaced, that old Intel version. That always just seemed too small for me personally. And because of that, when the 24-inch M1 iMac was announced, I kind of dismissed it straight away for being too small. I just thought, no, looks lovely, don't get me wrong, but I want the big one. Now looking back, that was a little bit short-sighted. The 24-inch screen on this iMac is of course a bit smaller than the 27-inch Intel iMac that I still have over there, but it doesn't matter. As I found out, if you're doing normal computer type stuff on this, those 24 inches are just perfectly big enough. You know, if you're doing email, web surfing, writing stuff, even if you want to use two apps side by side, there's just loads of room for it. And also Apple has done that very clever trick of reducing the size of the bezels, which makes the screen feel bigger than it actually is. And for all the flack they've been given about making those bezels white, that kind of benefits the screen size as well, because they just kind of disappear out of view, making the screen look even bigger still. So as I've said before in a previous video, which I'll link to above, don't worry about the screen size if you think it's too small. The second thing I've learned is that the base spec iMac is perfect as a general office or general home computer. And that base spec version has just 8 GB of unified memory, which doesn't sound like much at all. But I've got two M1 Macs with that same configuration. The first one is my beloved MacBook Air, and the second one is this 24-inch iMac. And I rely on both of those computers every single day to run this business, and they never ever let me down. They never slow down, there's no beach balling, there's no hanging, there's no crashing, there's no random restarts. It never feels like there's not enough memory. Now, as you may know, you may not know, there's just one fan in this 24-inch base spec iMac. And some people are worried about that, understandably. Don't be. I've heard the fan come on once. And weirdly, that was when it was rendering a Zoom recording. That's such a rare thing that I do anyway, and actually even when it was doing that and the fan briefly came on, wasn't very loud, but even when that was happening I could still get on and use the computer as normal. Now I bought that base spec iMac for two reasons. The first one was because I wanted to get that baseline view of how it operated and how it performed, just so I can give you the best buying advice. The second reason was because I just didn't think I needed any more than that. And that suspicion was confirmed because, as I say, it's just been a fantastic workhorse. Now, admittedly, I'm lucky enough that I have another Mac for my video editing duties, so I have a 16-inch MacBook Pro that I do all of the video editing for this channel on, so this iMac doesn't get used for those kinds of tasks. If you're planning on using this iMac for video editing, music production, software development, or something that you're fairly sure is fairly heavy duty, then just spec it up, spend as much as you can afford without breaking the bank, get the 16 gig of RAM, unified memory, up the storage if you can do. That way you have no buyer's remorse, and trust me, having edited 85 videos for this channel on the M1 Mac Mini that's behind me, which has the 16 gig of unified memory, that is perfect even for really strenuous tasks. But if you don't need all that, the base spec model is just fantastic. The third thing I've learned is a bit of an aesthetic thing and doesn't really mean anything, but I just wish I could see the back of it more. Now, I mentioned at the start of this video that the iMac is currently in my kitchen. Part of the reason for that is because I just want to see the back of that computer. Why? Because when these iMacs were first launched, one of the big things was the fact that you could get them in different colors. But the accent color, the kind of main color that you choose, is only really visible on the back of the computer. On the front, you get a much lighter hue where the chin is on the iMac itself, but it's the back back where that beautiful, in my case, the blue colour resides. And normally it's just stuffed against a wall, so I don't see it. So for the last 8 or 9 months, it's been in my studio at home, stuffed against a wall, and I just can't see that blue back. So at the minute it's in the kitchen so I can see it, and when it comes here, I'm going to put it somewhere so that when I enter the studio, I always get to see the back of that computer, because it's just a stunning looking thing. But it's just a bit ironic because the best looking part of the new iMac, most people will never see. The fourth thing I've learned is that there is one glaring omission, and it's not a deal breaker at all, but it is a bit frustrating. And that is the lack of Face ID or Touch ID across the whole range. So basically, if you want Touch ID, I've got the numbers here, you have to spend an additional £200 or $200 on the base spec to get the next spec up. If you do that, you get the keyboard with the Touch ID included. Great, but that's $200, £200 extra. It's a lot of money. Now you can add that keyboard to the base spec model, and I think it costs about £50, $50 to do it, but that makes the whole thing even more annoying. Why 50 quid, Apple? Just include it. It's clearly not a big money-making thing for you. And the annoying thing about this is that it's so easy to miss the fact that the base spec model doesn't have Touch ID. You can quite happily go through the buying process and completely miss that fact, and then you get a computer without that really important part of security. Now obviously you can buy the keyboard separately, but that's expensive as well. You're looking at £149 for the standard version and £179 for the one with the numeric keypad. And while I'm at it, why isn't there Face ID on this? Now the new iMac is ridiculously thin, pointlessly thin to a degree. So if they had to add just a few more millimeters to allow a Face ID sensor and all the gubbins they need for that to sit at the top of the screen, even with a notch, I don't care, then why don't they just do it? So just bear in mind that you need to add Touch ID as an option when you're buying your iMac. The last thing I've learned about the 24-inch iMac actually relates to the next big iMac, the one that is going to replace the 27-inch iMac. And what I mean by that is that the 24-inch iMac, I think personally, will suit the vast majority of normal consumers and normal business people like me who just need a computer to run their businesses from. We don't need a big screen for that at all. Now obviously that does leave people who just want a big screen, no problem with that whatsoever, and it leaves people who want a big screen for production reasons. So that could be photography, video editing, music production, whatever it might be. But that's quite a small subsection of Apple's user base. And that's why I think the 24-inch iMac is the perfect consumer/semi-pro desktop computer, which in turn means the big one, whenever that arrives, needs to be the iMac Pro. So expect obviously a bigger screen, but also black bezels, maybe some special screen technology and other stuff that will give it a huge price tag, but also make it far more tuned for the professional market. I'm actually coming round to this idea. I think it differentiates the product line really nicely, and it makes this 24-inch iMac an absolute no-brainer for most people. There's very little not to like about the 24-inch iMac, and it was actually my favourite product to review last year. And that's just because it was so easy to recommend. When you compare it against things like the MacBook Pro, which now has several different options, different chip variations, that product is very difficult to advise on because there's just so many different options for it. The 24-inch iMac has its own set of options, obviously, but as I've said throughout this entire video, most people will get away with that base spec version, or if they want to, just to get a bit of peace of mind, upgrading the unified memory to 16 gig. Now, obviously, as someone who is going to review the next big iMac, I'm looking forward to seeing what that's like. But I do think Apple have absolutely struck the sweet spot with this 24-inch version. Now, if you've still got some time, keep watching for a link to a video where I go into a little bit more detail on the size of that 24-inch iMac screen and what it's like to use on a daily basis. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.